So I'm going to do something a little differently in this class than I've done in the past. Is we're going to kind of jump straight into something that is architectural in nature, just so you can see what it can do and how easily it can do it. So what I've created is a box here. So you might want to take a minute to create something like it, but you don't have to necessarily. But basically, what I've created is kind of like a window portal thing, and we're going to infill it with a curtain wall, right? Just like a basic, not a curtain wall, but like a storefront system, right? So this is something that I am quite passionate about with Grasshopper. Is I like to give you guys things that are going to be time savers, that are going to help you out. But I'm going to show you sort of the difficulty in doing that before we really start to create something that's like well calibrated. So largely what I showed you already has just been in the XY plane. Okay, and normally I don't jump into the other planes too soon. Like usually it's not till like the third week or so. But we're just gonna start there because I think you guys are gonna be able to handle it. So anyway, what we've got to do is create. You would think we could create a grid, right? Maybe we just kind of create a grid across the front of this thing. So I'm going to show you why that doesn't work before we kind of create one that does work. So I'm going to do it based off, well, actually, let me kind of preface one more thing. So let's go to vector, and let's go to grid, and I'm going to do a rectangular grid. Now, what I want you to realize at this stage is that sometimes you know the tool that you want, or think you want. In this case, you think you want this. And then you don't quite know like what else you need to build up to it, right? So in this case, we kind of have to engineer it backwards and think about like, well, how do I place it where it needs to go and in the orientation that it needs to be in? So that's all going to be, I mean, these are just the X and Y values for how big and how many. But we're going to create a plane, or we're going to relocate the plane so that it would operate in the surface that we want. So right now when I drop it in, it defaulted to the bottom left corner. But if I want to, say, start at the face at that corner, I need to create a point to put it there. Maybe. Right? Maybe. That's just what I'm thinking, right? So I go to params, I go to single point, and I put a point on that corner. And then I go to params, and I grab a point. And then I right-click it, and I say set one point. I'm going to put it there, right? So when I plug that in, it relocates the grid, but it doesn't quite put it in the orientation that I want. So what we need to think about is how do we reorient a grid and place it in this location, but facing vertical. Okay, so now I'm still engineering backwards, but there's something else that I need to do between these two, right? I have a point where I want it to be, but I need to reorient it here so that it's facing the right way. So let's go to vector, and we're going to go to plane. And this is where we're going to be able to reorient something. And I'm hoping, I'm not sure if I can place this with a point, but let's take a look at it in 3D, right? So in 3D, we've got the X direction here, the Y direction there, and the Z direction here. So which plane do we want our storefront or curtain wall to be in? Yes, Y and Z. Okay, so now Y and Z is basically creating, oh no, I'm sorry, not Y and Z, X and Z. So that's creating a plane that is in the orientation we want, and we just need to locate it. So what's cool about these tools is that it allows you to reset the origin to a point. So I can click the point in there, which moves it to that particular location, and then I put that on the plane. So now we're already creating something that is in the correct orientation and in the correct location. So I'm going to create a couple sliders and just try and fit this thing, and you'll very quickly realize that it doesn't really work that way. So let's go to 0 is less than, I think I made it 40 feet long, so I'll do 0 is less than 40, I guess. But it's definitely not going to get up that high. and create 4 of these. And once I start to size them, so you'll see like, okay, I can do that. I can change the size and try and fit it. I can change how many I have this way. But I mean, the gist of it is that like you don't have a way of calibrating it so that it fits exactly on that surface. Does that make sense? I mean, you could if you got the math right and you had the size right, but you all know that in architecture, nothing is ever really that exact, right? And if it is that exact and if it is that rectilinear, probably not going to have a very good review. So anyway, but so for the simple things like this, we can actually break down via a surface. Okay, so that's like a very important, well, we'll just talk through the actual names of the tools. So what I'm going to do is drop a surface on this front face. And this is where I want you guys to actually start following me. Okay, so this is going to be the actual like training part of this. So let's go up to geometry and let's go to surface. And let's drop that thing in. So, oh, I just did something a little different. Did you guys notice what it was? Yes. So I basically, when I referenced the surface, I had the surface selected first. Then I went into surface and I said set one surface and it automatically did it. So I didn't need to go back into Rhino and click it because it was already selected. So that's just a heads up. But I actually don't need this surface anymore, so I'm going to hide it. So now I've got this like red sort of film that represents a surface in that location. Okay, so you guys are going to be, I think, shocked and in awe at how easy this is to do, to break it down into bits and pieces and kind of like calibrate like a storefront looking thing. But you're also not really going to understand the tools. So you have to pay very close attention. Okay. So we're going to go to Surface, Utility, and we're going to do this thing called Isotrim. Okay. When you drop it in, it calls it Subsurf. I don't know why it decides to have 2 different names, but it's going to confuse the hell out of you for like the next couple weeks. So Subsurf is under Surface, Utility. There you go. Now, what it's going to ask for is a surface to break down into subdivisions, and that's this guy. And then it's going to ask you for a domain. Now, that's a new term for most of you, I think, and it is a mathematical term. So when we go into math, that's where all of your domain functions are going to be. Now, in its most basic form, a domain is basically just a boundary of 2 numbers and whatever is in between, right? So that's what you're seeing up here where it says construct domain. It's literally just going to ask you for the number, the numerical start number, and then the ending number. We're not doing that right now. We're creating a geometrical domain, or defining a geometrical domain by this one right here. We're going to, well, we've kind of already defined the surface as the domain, but we're just kind of remapping what the subdivisions are going to be within that domain, if that makes any sense. So when you click on divide domain squared, it's going to look like this. It's under math domain. Anybody else do that with their A's? I do that all the time. Okay, so it's going to ask you for certain information. It's going to ask you for the surface that you're going to create the domain subdivisions on. That's the surface here. Boom. And then it's going to ask you for how many subdivisions. It defaults to 10, but what you're going to see is that it creates your segments, right? That's these here. It's numerical values in the U and the V direction. U and V are basically your 3-dimensional X and Y. Does that make sense? So you're going to see a lot of U's and V's. So that's up here, and it subdivides it into those panels. Okay, so we're going to create, you know, sort of a more, I guess, visually appealing subdivision that isn't so rigorous. Turn that off so you can see it a little better. So that's like really intense for how many subdivisions it is. So let's go to 0 is less than 15-ish, and I'm going to copy and paste that, and we're just going to work with like 1 and that direction. Some in this direction. Okay, there we go. So that's how easy it is to create subdivisions on a surface that you can use to create geometry, which can become your storefront, which we're going to do in a second. But I want you to get here first. What questions do you have? None? All right, cool. Yes?
So are we supposed to make that the storefront thing first?
Yeah, you don't have to make the like wall thing around it, but you just need a surface to work on.